That's it, man. Game over, man. It's game over. What the fuck are we gonna do now?
So if you have paid any attention to the news surrounding box office, then it seems we might be at a point in time where all we are most likely to see is the decline of comic book films. The recently released Fantastic Four opened quite strong domestically with 118 million, but as of the second week, it suffered a 66% fall in box office receipts to just 40 million. As of the making of this video, its worldwide box office stands at 372 million. This has led to the inevitable news of the movie being a box office bomb, but for once, I find myself wishing that this won't be so. Superman from James Gunn is also struggling at the box office. Its current global take stands at 555 million. Domestically, it's at 300 million, which the media is spinning as a success. But trust me, that is not good news considering the amount of money that was spent on production. Plus, if we are to factor in inflation, it's not even close to Man of Steel, which grossed 670 million. Warner Bros. Considered that film an underperformance, even with that comparably low budget. Now, no matter which comic book fashion you support, whether it's DC or Marvel, this is not news that you should celebrate. In fact, you should dread it. Because to the studios that provide for the ridiculous cost of production of these big budget productions, it's a signal to possibly consider termination. Most people will jump on the bandwagon to claim go woke, go broke. Unfortunately, it's not as binary as that, and the problem is bigger than that. As a comic book fan, I found most of my enjoyment growing up in the pages of numerous comic books. I consider myself incredibly lucky that for nearly 20 years I've been able to witness the rise of comic book movies and their domination of pop culture. Growing up, I never thought such a thing would be possible in my lifetime, but considering that life tends to be full of surprises, I am glad I have lived long enough to witness such a paradigm shift. Since its inception, the world of Hollywood has had obsessions and trends when it comes to film genre and production in each decade. In the 40s and 50s, most studios were focused on the drama genre. This was more focused on romance and the noir films, but the attraction to cinema attendance will fade. The genre will have a resurgence in the 70s with movies like The Deer Hunter and The Graduate. Comedy films, while also popular, will have a noticeable boom in the 80s with movies like Ghostbusters, Spaceballs, and Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. In the 90s, entire careers will be launched in the comedy genre alone, with Adam Sandler and Jim Carrey being notable examples. Westerns were one of the most enduring genres since the 20s through the 50s until its decline in the 60s. But even then, there were occasional releases through the 70s till now. Musicals were also quite popular during the 30s through the 60s, and at the time, it was widely considered the king of the box office returns. We all know some classics like The Sound of Music, The Wizard of Oz, and The Mary Poppins in our modern era. Currently, we still do get the occasional musical release with movies like La La Land, The Greatest Showman, and almost all of Disney's animated films. We once had adventure films like Ben-Hur, Spartacus, and Cleopatra, which were popular in the 40s through the 60s. This genre died off in the 70s with the rise of the science fiction era. Movies like Star Wars, Alien, and Mad Max will dominate the industry through the 80s, 90s, 2000s till date. My point in this brief lesson is not to give you a film history, but is to stress the point that no one particular genre of film will dominate forever. All things have their beginning, their rise, their peak, and their fall. And right now, it would seem that the Grim Reaper is calmly knocking on the door of the comic book film genre. Since 2008, the biggest movie releases has often been comic book films, and its enduring popularity at the box office has always been pretty evident. Cinematic universes became the norm for these movies, which allowed different creative people to add their own take on stories that were once considered childish by most of the general public to critical acclaim. Christopher Nolan's take on the Batman franchise would earn the late Heath Ledger a posthumous Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor in 2009. His performance as the Joker would simply never be topped. Some film studios even tried to ride the bandwagon with their own cinematic universes. Does anyone remember Universal's so-called Dark Universe? I am sure that after the Mummy remake bombed like Hiroshima, they gave up on their plans. But it seems they are making a remake to that remake, so does that make it a remake squared? But I digress. But like November Rain, nothing lasts forever, and eventually there is a decline and the inevitable fall. I have been a fan of this film genre for a long time, and I have no qualms in saying that the peak of comic book movies in 2019 was the suitably named Endgame. To me, it seemed like things were only going to go downhill from here on. Since the release of Avengers Endgame, poor decision making and oversaturation of content has been the norm for Disney Studios. It often feels like creatively, Disney may be bankrupt. But if their recent obsession with live-action remakes of their classic animations is anything to go by, then the studio needs a defibrillator to keep from flatlining. I have mentioned before that the peak of Disney Star Wars was The Force Awakens, and this is an absolute fact. It has been diminishing returns since then, but it does not mean that we haven't also had some classic Star Wars. For every Ashoka and the Acolyte, there is an Andor and the Clone Wars. Yes, there is more bad than good, but this is also why we value the good ones deeply. Now, it's no secret that during the reign of comic book movies in cinemas, Marvel Studios was the king. Disney, the owner of Marvel, has enjoyed incredible success at the box office in 2010 to the early 2020s. But not even eagles can fly forever, and as such, the studio has been experiencing their own share of box office failures in recent times. But there is context for this, and it's not just backlash from questionable decision making and tone-deaf messaging. The years 2020 to early 2022 were uniquely terrible years in human history with the COVID pandemic. The actual loss of life was staggering, but the economic damage of that period was also well documented. That tends to happen when the world is shut down and most people have to stay in isolation. The impact on mental health was also quite damaging during this time. However, a greater effect of lockdown was a change in consumer behavior. All we had was time and people were relying more on streaming services to get the entertainment fix. That meant that when the world was fully opened up, these newly learned habits were very much ingrained in us. This also meant that we were much more selective about the films we were willing to go to the cinemas to watch. And considering the sheer amount of garbage films that were being released from 2022 to 2025, most people chose to wait for streaming. After all, the time movies spend in cinemas before they are released to streaming services has shortened drastically. It also does not help that comic book movie budgets were increasing to ridiculous amounts. Rumors of the two most recent ones, which are Fantastic Four and Superman costing over $300 million, are rampant on the internet. And mind you, I'm only saying they are rumors because studios use creative accounting methods to hide the actual cost of budgets on films, and it's often for tax benefits and liabilities. If these rumors are to be believed, then profitability on such films can only be considered after they make nearly $1 billion at the box office, which is simply unsustainable. Furthermore, the concept of studio planning for 10-year stretches of movie releases does not help, as oftentimes, these so-called plans simply fail. Take for example the Phase 4 of Marvel with the Kang Dynasty nonsense. Does anyone even remember the whole debacle? What these kind of film announcements serve to do is to hype up the fans to get excited for these possible releases. But it's fair to say that after nearly 20 years, it's getting harder and harder to get that reaction. The majority of fans and audiences are just whelmed. We may be anticipating a Spider-Man film, but most of us will not feel that way about an Eternals movie, or even Ironheart. It's fair to say that the cinematic universe era will be coming to an end in the very near future. And trust me when I tell you, it gives me no pleasure to say this, because right now, the DC universe under James Gunn seems to be gearing up to offer steep competition to Marvel, but the possibility of seeing such a future is questionable right now. This is mostly because the box office returns on its most recent outings, the Suicide Squad and Superman, does not give me much confidence that a dysfunctional studio like Warner Brothers can actually stay the course. In nature, all organisms that fail to evolve will inevitably die, and given that film studios are formed and run by humans, this trait will also apply to movies and their production. It might be that in the era of streaming, how comic book movies are produced will have to change to suit the consumer. Maybe instead of gigantic cinema releases, the new trend will be studios making a few well-tailored movies with manageable budgets for streaming platforms. The thing is, it can work and it has worked before. The template has already been tested with Zack Snyder's Justice League. And it won't necessarily be a bad thing either, as it will allow for more author-driven filmmaking, which will be refreshing given our current corporate committee model. But maybe that's just me having too much hope for the future. But then again, life is all about change, and the best way to handle change is to fully embrace it. Time never stays still, as the pendulum always swings and the bell tolls. And for whom it tolls for, we will all soon know. I have faith in the future when it comes to human affairs because I am a big believer that necessity is often the mother of invention. People's tastes will change with time, and this phenomenon is no different this time. To me, if it's really meant to be the end of comic books in a few short years, then I will in no way be angry or even bitter because I have been lucky to have seen this era. I have a wonderful collection of films that I can always rewatch and look back on with a smile. Not all of these films are good, but they all came to me at a time in my life when I was more optimistic than I currently am. A healthy dose of nostalgia is often required so we can cope with the brutality of reality, but that is also a genuine part of the human experience. I don't have a crystal ball that I can use to tell you the future, but all I can say is, time will tell.